gets a goal? Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello everyone, so we're back as the mist starts to clear and Gameweek 29 the strategy starts to be solidified, albeit slightly appended by freak injuries and a certain Phil Foden making a certain case to be a potential season keeper. Yes, what a weekend it was actually of football, really enjoyable I felt, lots going on, lots to discuss, and in the background, I know the regular listeners and the regular viewers on YouTube will be used to my phone going ding every now and again. It feels like it's 5-0 at half time in the Arsenal game, Sam. It feels like that's going to happen an awful lot during the second half, unless there's obviously loads of substitutions at half time, which is probably on the horizon. Hey, well done, Tom. Date the pod immediately. Anyway, yes, I am Tom. I'm here with a beer, as you just heard from me calling myself my own name. And I'm joined as usual by Sam today. You're right, mate.
Yeah, very well, thank you. I've been enjoying the first half of the Arsenal match, mainly because there's a outside chance that Southampton no longer will hold the record for the heaviest defeat in Premier League history if things go the way we think they might continue to go in the second half. But as a non-Saka captainer, I've got one very begrudging eye on the scores as they rack up in the second half. In the meantime, though, we are who got the assist. On today's pod, as Tom mentioned, Foden is putting his hand up for being a potential season keeper at the moment. And spoiler alert, at least one of us is seriously considering selling him this game week as well. So we thought it might be interesting to assess him and a few others in terms of their value versus their listed price at the start of the season. If FPL was repriced tomorrow, how would they come out? What prices would they be? And what does that tell us about those assets for later on in the season? We obviously will also preview the week ahead. Obviously, bold claims will come, but then talk about some of our current thoughts on chip strategies, as we're both actually pretty open to free hitting and not free hitting in game week 29. So there's lots to discuss there. Our strategies are certainly not set in stone just yet. Plus, obviously, best transfers and captains as per usual, although we'll focus more on the transfers with Dom Solanke seemingly declaring himself fit. It's the 4th of March, Monday, half-time, as Tom mentioned in the Arsenal game, 5-0 currently, and we're both just waiting for the ding for a Sheffield United goal to cancel out our double clean sheet or an early substitution. In the meantime, though, shall we take a look at scores on the doors, Tom?
Yeah, let's do it. So, yeah, fairly similar, I think, again this week. We both went for the Hwang to Son move, as you'd expect, on 74 at the moment. We'll see what happens. I think it'll probably be, what's that, 75, 76. I'm counting one extra point for both the Arsenal defenders because there will be that clean sheet wipeout. Saka, who knows? But yeah, a small green arrow at the moment. It's like 7% change, and I guess the story of the week was obviously Foden and Haaland not doing very much. That miss. I think people were saying at the time, "Oh, was it the miss of the century or the miss of the season?" At least, okay, get behind the miss of the season. Son, absolutely hatful of chances to get returns, be they assists or goals, just didn't quite come off him in that game. I was really thinking of FPL General during that game because his son is called Sonny. He was just like, no, right, I'm going to do it for obviously for sentimental reasons, and he could have really walked away with loads of points from that.
Yeah,
and Haaland just getting the one goal, really, a bit painful watching Saka do his thing above 100% EO for both of us. Obviously, I was set on Haaland midweek when we came back together on Thursday to discuss kind of the aftermath of all of the FA Cup games. Hindsight isn't in full swing, as Sam mentioned earlier on, but as we both said kind of last Monday, it made a lot of sense to go with Haaland as we did, and the XG for Haaland was good enough, that there can't be too many regrets. It's just that kind of idea that maybe I need to be a bit more brave, maybe with the captaincy, to make gains at this point. Maybe that's something I should have kind of stuck with. I know that Sim, who was on last Monday, did go with Saka in the end. The gains slightly, I should probably mention as well, diluted by the fact that even though we both got a rare goalkeeper clean sheet, everybody else either got a clean sheet from the goalkeeper if you're in like a Neto or something, or you got a clean sheet, or you got a pen save through Areola. Hearteningly, a lot of people did bench Areola, so it wasn't as bad as it could have been. But still, yeah, that 13 points out of nowhere, really punishing mini leagues. Slow but steady progress. It would be very nice to eventually get a really good week, a stellar week, where you get a kind of 20, 30 points above the average. But, whether that's going to happen anytime soon, we'll need to see. And you're very similar, aren't you, Sam? Although you did, in the end, get rid of that festering sore known as Estupinian.
Yeah, so not too much more to speak about because we've got 10 of the 11 same players. Again, we've kind of converged on the same team all of a sudden. I did get rid of Estupinian for a hit, and to be honest, I seeing him start, I didn't even care. I was just so happy to have gotten rid of him. Just pressing that button filled me with
a great feeling,
so much joy that he could have scored 3-4 goals, and I still would have thought, you know what, it felt good at the time. I'm happy with it.
Saka subbed at half time.
Was he actually? Wow.
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, at least he got the 2 assists for any captainers out there. So obviously it will hurt now, but he did do better than Haaland. So fair enough. Anyway, so yeah, Gabriel came in for Estupinian. I assume because you haven't said it, he hasn't been subbed at half time. So fingers crossed the clean sheet holds. But obviously taking a hit for an extra Arsenal defender, it would be sod's law that they concede in the 75th minute or something to a pointless Brereton Diaz goal and ruins what could be very close to a green arrow at the moment. I've got the same score as you, 74 at the moment, but with the hit takes me to 70 and very slightly beneath parity. So down to 225k at the moment from 215. All it would take is that double clean sheet and it would definitely be a green arrow. So fingers crossed for the second half, but either way, it's not going to be big one way or the other without a Gabriel or a Saliba goal, which obviously they're great from set pieces, but it is still fundamentally quite unlikely to happen in 45 minutes of football. So should be around where I was at the start of the game week.
Yeah, no, definitely. Cool. All right. Well, that will be going on in the background. But meantime, shall we get into the main topic for this week? One that we both kind of were discussing a little bit, kind of tangentially, when we were kind of just reflecting on Phil Foden, how good he was. I mean, you were full of praise of him during the game, weren't you?
I
actually just love him, etc., etc. And I think we've both kind of been quite pro Foden throughout the course of the season. I remember kind of you went in fairly early, didn't you?
Yeah, very early.
Having that Foden feeling. Yeah, and we both did that selling Bruno in game week 3, I think it was, wasn't it, or game week 4?
Yeah, that rings a bell.
Went to Mbumo, you went to Foden, and then Bruno decided to score a double-digit haul, and thus began the downfall. But anyway, I think this is always an interesting kind of topic to just kind of dig into a little bit, because prices are fixed at the start of the year, as we know, but during the course of the year, much changes, and it can be that a slight, mistake in the early part of the season in terms of their pricing has ongoing ramifications throughout the campaign. It can be a mistake. It can be one where you can be more charitable. We've got kind of, I guess, instances of both throughout history and maybe even this season. The big mistake that always comes to mind for everybody, top of mind, is obviously Lundstram when he was 4.0 as a Sheffield United defender, never played defence in his life, was a midfielder wearing number 10 on his back. But, this year, pre-season, just for those who've been listening since then, we looked at the prices and we spoke a lot about how the price structure was flattened, which heightened choice, but equally perhaps removed, at least early doors. I think that, as time's developed, it's been less that this is kind of the narrative which has been kind of pervading. But it did sort of, at the beginning at least, remove pricing from the equation in terms of picking your initial side for game week 1, aided in the best by the fact that Mo Salah wasn't in most people's teams for quite a while. So those fears have definitely dissipated somewhat, but it does sort of kind of roll back and forth a bit like the tide. And Sam, pricing every year is so fascinating, isn't it? And revisiting how these players have performed versus their price, i.e. their value, is something which is always sort of, I guess, a preoccupation of FPL managers. Is
Yeah, absolutely. Finding that like underpriced value gem at the start of the year can be the thing that unlocks a great season, especially if you ride those price rises across the first few game weeks. Obviously, Lundstrom's a great topic for a great way of remembering this, but there are plenty of examples, even Trent as well back in the day, when he really started to come to the forefront and get regular starts. He was massively underpriced. And we could reel off 100 examples of this, so I won't take up all day doing so. But I think there have been some pretty immediate examples that spring to mind this season that, even though they have had price rises, I would still suggest they're significantly underpriced. And there's also a number of players that we'll probably go into talking about today in the next hour or so, that despite the fact they weren't necessarily bargains at the start of the season, they are now so performing above the level that we're used to seeing them. They've taken that next step up to the point where there are going to be question marks about, where are they premiums? Are they just sub premiums? Are they still fitting into the 8 million bracket? And there's a lot of those players around at the moment that you just wonder, especially if we were to lose someone like Salah from the game next year, which, okay, we don't know what's going to happen there yet, but it's certainly a possibility. If that were to happen, some of these players are probably going to need to be shoved up to near premium prices to make pricing anywhere near relevant in our teams next year.
Yeah, definitely. And there's definitely going to be, well, we'll definitely look at it, definitely on a similar analysis again, but you're completely right. When they change, remove like a tent pole, I suppose, in terms of the pricing structure, they need to kind of fill the gap and kind of make sure that everything's even distributed. And we definitely have seen a bit of an absence of, I think a midfielder, not the highest priced one, but the tier beneath. That's definitely one that we've seen sort of lacking for quite a while. Not since Hazard left, really. Have we really seen anyone kind of come in to go alongside De Bruyne? I mean, obviously Son was there for a little bit. This year had kind of quite a large downgrade after a fairly anemic by his standards. 2022-23 started the season 9.0, one that we're not actually going to cover today, but it now kind of occurs to me that we probably should have. But anyway, yeah, a really interesting sort of time, and we will come on to that into the future. I just want to talk about very quickly the behavioral science behind why price and kind of quality is something which kind of is always sort of in our minds. So applying kind of this all to FPL, we'll often assume that a more expensive player is a better quality or value, when in fact that's not often the case. I was thinking the other day about that split game week, Sam, when you reminded me kind of why you love Palmer so much. It was obviously that he scored very early on, and it maybe could be argued that a lot of people did go for Saka that week, and it could maybe be argued that there was a great sense of safety in plumping for the more expensive pick. It was seen as being sort of a better thing and more kind of quality sort of choice to make.
Yeah.
If you look in teams as well, obviously now we know better, but at the start of the season, looking at someone like Cole Palmer versus Raheem Sterling at Chelsea, Alejandro Garnacho versus Marcus Rashford at Man United, you may have been thinking, the price kind of implies a sense of value for these players, and it's the same everywhere else as a human being. So when shopping around for different products, you often make different inferences about a product and its quality based on its price. So if something is kind of priced higher, you tend to believe that it's more better quality, and it kind of sits outside of tangibility a lot of the time as well. So if you're buying something, it has to do the job you're sort of buying it for. So take something like whiskey, for example. So if a whiskey isn't a whiskey, it doesn't include the taste that makes it whiskey, or maybe the alcohol content, it's not going to be worth it for the consumer to buy or the producer to sell. That's obvious. But as long as it fulfills its brief, so to say, as a product, your consideration of it becomes more nuanced. It depends on sort of that involvement thing we spoke about, like how involved you are in understanding the product, if you're a whiskey connoisseur, versus someone like me. So my father-in-law loves whiskey, for example, but I know nothing about it. And if I'm buying something impromptu, I'm going to have the time to research it. It's not like for a big sort of birthday or something like that. It's just to say thank you for doing a job around the house, something like that. I'll always tend to buy something more expensive, just because I think that, if it's cheap, it may be kind of worse quality. It may be kind of something that he won't appreciate, or he'll think, oh God, Tom's a bit cheap, isn't he? So I'll always kind of go for something at least sort of mid-range. There's that kind of idea, I'll have the second cheapest sort of bottle of wine you've got on your menu, sir. Popularized by Homer Simpson. So you're not too cheap, but you're kind of, you're still sort of within that sort of zone. But fun fact, that is often the wine they want to get rid of the most. But that links very kind of kindly into FPL a lot of the time, because you do always think that the price equals the quality, but a lot of the time it is set way back in time, especially when we get to now, back at the start of the season, that's when all these prices were set. And it can mean that it can look faintly silly if we examine it through the prism of today and what we know now. Yeah, there's a bit of hindsight obviously attached to it. But that in itself is really interesting. And I guess it made us wonder, looping back to why we're here, especially in the conversation about Foden, what would he cost in reality now? And how a few other players would perhaps be priced if we were to kind of revisit them again. So we're going to revalue a few guys today before we get on to kind of the main meat and drink, what we can do next week, etc., etc. We'll get on to that, I promise. But this is a really interesting thing, I think, just to meditate on for a little bit. So starting with Foden as a case in point, I started the season at 7.5, and at the start of the season, we were both flabbergasted, weren't we? Because that was a price drop after his best season ever.
Yeah.
You mentioned on X that he's far surpassed that now too. So definitely kind of on the upward trajectory, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, it's all minutes with Foden, isn't it? We always knew that he had the potential of being a world beater. The quality was always there, but in a Pep Guardiola side, especially as a young player, he always seemed to be someone that you could never really rely on for minutes. Maybe in like little clusters of fixtures where he's hit form 5 or 6 games in a row, you might get a bit lucky and get five starts out of him. But now he's positioned himself as an absolute lock in that team. He is one of their most important players now. And he might now only be in line for a rest when he actually genuinely needs a rest, rather than just because Pep fancies mixing up a little bit. And I think that's why he was 7.5 million. It was always because of the expected minutes rather than anything else. But honestly, even if the minutes weren't as good as they have been, 7.5 was probably still quite on the low side. With everything in mind, what we now know and the player he's turned out to be this season, he's got the minutes nailed in. His underlying data is improving as well. He's getting much more involved in central areas and in key elements of the way City attack now. That 7.5 is, he will never be down at that price ever again. He will enter the game, I would suspect, at a minimum of 8.5 next year. The only reason I'm not pushing above something like 9 million is because the one aspect he doesn't have and probably won't have anytime soon is penalties. And I think that's what takes a player who isn't necessarily heavily leaned towards goal threat. He's very much a balance between the two, between assists and goals. That sort of player, I think, without penalties, unless you are hitting like De Bruyne numbers of assists, it's quite hard to justify above 10 million. So that's why I would say 8.5 to 9 is probably where we will see him. And if I had to guess right now, it might just about be on the 8.5 side of things.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to try to guess FPL too much, because I think there's definitely a whole sort of realm of things they need to consider, or not, depending on your regard for them. On the penalties point, I mean, we've seen Son in the past, for example. Obviously, after consecutive 200 club finishes, reached the 10. 2018-19, I've written my notes here. He got 1 million price rise after 159 points were scored that year.
Wow, really?
Foden's on 158 right now. So, we've seen strange things happen. And if there is that gap that you mentioned earlier on, I was going to mention that to hit at this juncture, if I hadn't really kind of stumbled into it and you hadn't eloquently brought it up too. I think that there may be kind of a bit of a hole to fill, I suppose, in sort of that low price, lower end premium sort of slot. Oh, a 6 for Foden to fill. So I think that we may well find. Oh my God, Ben White has scored a goal, Sam!
No way!
Get in!
I'm happy for you. I'm happy
OMFG.
for you.
Right, I'm off. See you later. Right, I'm done. Oh my God. Right, I need to stop for a second. Where was I? Right. Ben White has done a goal. It's incredible, Sam. So so right now, though, if we're going to say he's going to come in at, well, if we think 8.5, I think 9.5 probably next year.
Okay.
If it was redone now, he's 8.1 at the moment. Do you think they would put him up to 9 or something like that just because of what he's got?
Yeah, I mean, 9 would probably be fair. I would probably go 8.5 just because we've seen them be quite generous with their pricing in the last couple of years to keep the game open and accessible to more casual players. Make sure that you can get most of the players you like in your team. So that would be the one reason I'd suggest it might be a little bit lower than we're expecting. But if fair's fair and he continues on this sort of trajectory, then 9.5 is absolutely the price he should be at. It's just I'm trying to get in the minds of an FPL game manager. And I feel like on the lower side is the way to keep it more accessible to the casuals. But yeah, I think anywhere in that range, 8.5 to 9.5 is absolutely fair play.
Oh, elated, absolutely elated. Not by your answer, not by Ben White doing a goal.
Can it not be both?
Yeah, no, it is both. It is both. No, that's fair play, and I think he's definitely due one. Turning to a couple of individuals actually, and maybe ones which are both kind of ones you can forgive FPL for potentially.
Yeah.
There are two players on 129 points who are mainstays in our teams, or have been mainstays in our teams. They're still in mine. You've still got one. Cole Palmer. Start the season at 5, now 5.7. 129 points for him. Saw those rebuys last week. And then Gordon, similar vote to Palmer. Start the season 5.5, now up to 6. I think with Palmer especially, a classic example of an individual whose price we can maybe excuse. Like FPL couldn't have kind of foreseen his ascent from Man City bit part player to Chelsea talisman, right? But these two are really interesting kind of just to put together because they're 13th and 17th non-pen XGI this season, just 0.5 away from each other. So performing very similarly, both sort of in a similar sort of two-piece in the pod, I guess. So a lot to talk about there. And I wonder, these are, I suppose, examples of the sorts of gems we should all be looking for. It's just fascinating that they're both kind of playing for, feasibly on paper at least, two very big teams, especially in Newcastle, Champions League sort of level team from last year, but both sort of emerging as well. I'm not saying this was a mistake, Sam, and I think they're definitely ones you can sort of excuse FPL for, but they are the sort of gifts which keep on giving and enable everything else.
Yeah, so there are always bargains that, I mean, no one could have foreseen outside of maybe the players themselves and the managers who have all the belief in them. But nobody knew when the pricing came out that Palmer was going to be a regular starter for a club that he hadn't signed for yet. And especially not just a regular starter, but in a very advanced position on penalties. So I think 5 was absolutely fair enough because they were predicting him to be a Man City bench player. Obviously, that is not the case. And if they were to reprice him now, I have no doubt that he would be probably quite significantly north of 7 million. I would actually probably go as far as 8 million for someone on penalties. Maybe just because he hasn't got as long in the game as someone like Foden or Saka, they wouldn't push him beyond 8 for now. But 2 seasons in a row of keeping penalties, starting, playing 90 week in, week out, and he could easily start pushing the sub premium category as well. For the time being, though, he's going around at a value of 8 or 9 million quite comfortably. And a player on penalties in what is supposed to be an elite side is, well, 5 million is just a complete joke, really. But it's not FPL's fault. It's just sometimes these players emerge as if from nowhere. And unless you're psychic, you're not gonna really price that in at the start of the season.
No, definitely not. And I do think that this year, especially if you had to reprice them both now, you would be looking at kind of 7.5-ish sort of level players, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I'd go a bit lower on Gordon, a bit higher on Palmer.
Okay.
Personally, just because Gordon having penalties sometimes obviously helps, but the data isn't quite as good as Palmer's is. And obviously with Palmer on penalties all the time, I would I'd probably go like 7.5 and 8, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, so tack on the extra little bit just to kind of facilitate the penalties.
Yeah, personally, yeah.
Yeah, I guess maybe if Harvey Barnes is back and the new, I guess maybe Gordon's kind of had to play a lot of these games, which, I mean, obviously a lot of the games, especially when they were all knackered around Christmas time, they aren't going to do much for very many things, but it does mean that there's sort of a slight bit more time on the pitch potentially. Yeah, sure. I know that, for example, his minutes are way bigger than Palmer's just because Palmer didn't obviously start playing until game week 5, game week 6, something like that. But I think he's got kind of 400, 500. I think I've written 500 minutes. I've got here in my notes, really badly written notes, blaming me working till late, which I guess kind of prerequisite all of that sort of thing as well. I don't know. It's really interesting with a player like Palmer, and it's always one you've got to watch out for. Like, especially with a team like Chelsea, who are likely to kind of occupy the same slot next year as a team who have the money, have kind of on paper ostensibly quality players in their team, um, who are going to be without any European competition to worry about. It's always worth looking for these sorts of bargains within that sort of paradigm, I think. I think it'll be really interesting to see where they go next year, that's for sure. There's always going to be replacements, but equally, these are kind of great individual sort of pickups, talisman, I suppose, within that sort of province. So, yeah, really interesting. Ollie Watkins, Sam.
Yeah, big one.
Definitely one to discuss. So, I was saying to you the other day that I backed him to be part of the 200 club this season, his first 200 club. He's only 17 points off it right now. He's a top scoring player in fantasy football, which is quite an achievement, I think. Been spoken about kind of widely for an England place at the Euros. Shearer said the weekend, and he's got his passport. He's gone through boarding control. He's basically there. Just 0.5 million price rise on last year, but third for non-pen XGI right now this year. No, second of course is second for that. Second, fourth for XG. Like playing just kind of widely across everything, but definitely a player who I don't know. We both kind of said that there was a lot of negative energy towards him, negative vibes for quite a long time, and probably now kind of a breach that Darwin Nunez has stepped into.
Yeah.
Wally Watkins, if he could play for England, so can you. All this sort of nonsense, but definitely one who has he subverted expectations, do you think? Because we were quite high on him, weren't we, at the start of the season, and then repaid that faith by selling him at a couple of junctures, only to be massively punished.
Yeah, well, the second one was because we thought he was injured. So I'm going to let us off on that one. But the first one was just poor FPL management, I think. We gave up our faith in him too quickly because we were both really high on him at the start of the season. And I think he's even surpassed that hype. I think we knew that he would be a decent price as he was at the start of the season. And based in the fact that Emery had already gotten quite a lot out of him in the 6 or 7 months that he'd already been at the club. So we did have high expectations, but I don't think anyone could have predicted 31 returns in 27 games. That is just madness. He has gone way beyond expectations for a top 6 striker. And he's at the moment, like pound for pound, going for like a 250 point season, which is like, obviously your bold claim was 200 points. He's going to annihilate that at this rate. He could easily get
I had 200 points club. I don't think I had 200 points exactly. That is really
no, not 200 points exactly. I mean you went for a bold claim, as in it's bold to say you would get
got
to
you.
200.
I was going to say that is harsh.
No. I'm saying it was bold to get to 200 for him to get to
White's been sub, Sam.
Has he? Wow, locked in, mate. You've done very well there.
I'll take it very, very
well. So yeah, I'm moving back to Watkins briefly before Arsenal inevitably lose a clean sheet. So he could, in my view, be very close to stepping into that Vardy territory next season with. Obviously, Vardy never played for, obviously they won the league, but he never played for a historically top 6, top 4 club. Very much in the sort of position that Villa find themselves in at the moment. They're the disruptors to the traditional top 4, top 6. And Watkins is the talismanic figure in there. And he's doing so without penalties, by the way, which is just even more unbelievable. I could see him easily getting a 10 million plus price point just because we've got such a lack of forwards in the game in and around that sort of challenger price. Outside of Haaland, there's really nothing. And I think at the start of the season, him and Gabriel Jesus were joint second highest price strikers at 8 million. That won't be the case next year. He will comfortably be above that. If he wasn't above 9, I would be stunned. And I would personally say 10, 10.5.
We've definitely seen a resurgence, haven't we, in the strikers, just to kind of go on a tangent, because why not? And I think that at the start of the year, it was 3-5-2. I know that there were some like James and Mark, FPL General, who were sticking to that 3-4-3. But it's those options have only kind of, I guess, really re-emerged fairly recently through the likes of Darwin, putting his hand up. Solanke, of course, occupying many teams at the moment for obvious reasons. Even Isak could kind of play a role throughout the back end of the season because he's got those great fixtures. Some
Mhm.
likes of Nick Jackson as well appear in teams. Rasmus Højlund as well before his injury kind of found the goal scoring touch. And I don't, as you said, next year I think we will see that striker sort of. Area become a lot more kind of hotly contested, because at the start of the year I think we were just thinking, you know what, yeah, it's just Haaland and Watkins, let's just leave it at that. And now I think, especially especially when thoughts will turn to wildcards in not very long. In the past, it would have been, yeah, just pack up the midfield. And 3-5-2 is historically how I've ended every season, pretty much, because the midfield options have been so bountiful. But this year, you maybe will be looking elsewhere, especially with the likes of Solanke having great fixtures past kind of past the blank as well. I think the other point in Watkins, Sam, which we will come on to in future. So I think just kind of outline thoughts here, but there is kind of a thought that he doesn't have any doubles this year. He categorically cannot have a double game week, apart from something absolutely outlandish happening.
Yeah.
Do you sell a player that consistent?
It's
Can you
gonna-
afford to? Are you just kind of thinking, you know what, I'm going to prioritize doubles no matter what, so I'm going to get an Isak or something, or a Højlund? Or is he the sort of player you just think, you know what, leave him in there, set and forget, like we should have all done with Hazard back in the day? Just leave him in there. He will return for you. Just forget about that slot altogether, because he has kind of made the case for himself. And if you watch Villa play, like, he is kind of a vintage kind of Vardy-esque sort of character. Quite a lot to
yeah.
consider there, isn't there? So outline thoughts now. I know that we're not kind of at crunch point right now.
Yeah, well, I think we'll go through this in the second half too, but there's a massive decision on the horizon with Watkins. When we get to something like wildcard, if you're looking at wildcarding in game week 30, 31, Villa's fixtures do turn pretty quickly after that. They obviously don't have the doubles. And if, for example, Man United and Newcastle get the double in 34, then Isak, Højlund could easily be players on your radar that you look at having that spot in place of Watkins. However, outside of the very specific double game weeks, of which we know there are two, outside of after game week 28 at least, those 2 weeks aside, I think Watkins, independent of the fixture, needs to be a pretty major consideration in any given game week. The guy is on a ridiculous purple patch of form, so I'd be pretty scared of getting rid of him for any more than one game week at a time, and that would probably have to be the double as well. That being said, when you look at structure on a wild card, if you're looking at wildcarding in that sort of period, getting back to Salah alongside Haaland is going to be very tough without sacrificing one of Watkins, Saka, Trippier maybe as an outsider as well. Foden comes into it. Son comes into it as well. And Watkins is the one without the good fixtures around that period. So I think there will be managers out there that get rid of him and tackle, like, go head to head against those fixtures. I'm not currently sure I'm brave enough to sell him a third time this season, because I know what happens when I do.
Exactly. Oh, exactly. I mean, the back end for Villa is mixed bag. No,
Yeah.
it's fair to say. And there's definitely going to be loads of people look at it and just think, you know what, there are going to be other strikers. I've mentioned Isak, I've mentioned Solanke, at least early doors in the 30s. So you're thinking, you know what, I'm just going to just chance it without him. But yeah, there's going to be, I guess, an extant EO threat with Watkins throughout the course of the season. And there will be kind of a real division in terms of people just thinking, you know what, I'm going to just stay the course with him. We know at the moment he's basically irrelevant unless you captain him this week, in which case, well done, because he was kind of the winning captain, a distant third in most people's thoughts, but undoubtedly the winner. But effective ownership in top 10k, kind of 98.6%. And 95% overall. So like any goal that he scored for you was like 200 places, something like that. That will diminish, and it will just be the case of do you benefit, or do you get hurt by that? But they can't really be, barring those of injuries, for Villa, be many worries about him falling off. And I think that when it comes to the end of the season pod, he'll definitely be in amongst it for player of the season, I think, for me. which maybe sounds like a big talk at the moment. But I mean, he is the top scoring player right now. And if the season's end tomorrow, I think he would be top of everyone's sort of lists, to be honest. I suppose one player who we all thought at the start of the year would be kind of in amongst it, but hasn't quite been, is Trent, a player who's always worth discussing in this kind of revaluation sort of sphere. 8.5 million start of the year, and we all lauded that initially. Now, we all thought, FPL were going to be daring and start to really sort of mess around with it, because Trent was always an auto include at any price for all of us. But my season on bold claim, alongside the Watkins one, was that he'd be priced out of teams. He's outside the top 50 non-pen and XGI this year. Obviously, a lot of injuries really affecting him. But is it a case that there were too many options elsewhere, Sam? Crowding him out? Was it the fact that no clean sheets for Liverpool dented his appeal, and no clean sheets anywhere basically dented his appeal? Really interesting one, and one that I'm not going to tick off the fact that my bold claim's been successful quite yet, because it could be the second half of the year, the business end of the year. Second half is we're well into that. It could well be that he kind of fights his way back to being in the mainstay for everybody, but at the moment, it is looking a bit difficult for him to really make a comeback FPL wise.
I kind of disagree with you on this one. I think he's not an auto pick anymore. That's fine. But at 8.5 million, I don't think anyone expected him to be. What the pricing has done, in my view, has made it a decision. And I think the reason that he's not in teams now is because he got the injury at the really unfortunate time before the double game week. Before that point, everyone was looking at loading up to get to Trent ahead of double game week 25. But also, even before that, they were on a good run of fixtures and he was getting into a lot of sides, including my own. So I don't think his price has made him irrelevant as an FPL asset at all. I think it's just made it a pretty big decision on whether or not to have a structure that incorporates a premium defender, or to go slightly heavier on the midfield, or with an extra heavier attacker as well. So I think at times he has been relevant. I don't think he's been priced out. I think he's just been sort of moved back away from an auto pick to someone in the same sort of stratosphere as Foden might have previously been in, or Saka might have previously been in seasons gone past, where you pick your moments with a player like that with a good run of fixtures, or he's in a good patch of form. And I think he's just been a little bit unfortunate to get the injury when he had, because I don't think we'd be having this discussion at all if he had played in double game week 25.
Yeah. I think that's always going to be part and parcel of it, I guess. Injuries that kind of impact how you do see a player's performance over the course of the season. It's the nuance, isn't it? Beyond the kind of the headline number. And you are right. Like, when you bought him in around Christmas, he was your Christmas present to yourself, wasn't he?
Yeah.
To go with Trent. And
I forgot
there was definitely that sort of photo, fear of Trent. And fear of Trenting out, which definitely was there for me. And it may well be that he does kind of reappear in squads. So Liverpool's running is pretty good. There's a double with Everton likely to be kind of alongside the Aston Villa game in game week 37. If James from Planet FPL source is right, or there's a Fulham versus, or there's one with Fulham in 34.
Yeah.
Could well be kind of that ultimate sort of ace in the hole you could go for on a wild card. I think you're probably correct that he's one that I don't know. I think maybe I'll kind of claim it at the end of the year in terms of my season on bold claim as kind of a qualified success, perhaps. I think it would be one of those that you claim as a success, while ignoring all the sort of extraneous contextual factors which have played into an individual. The final thing to just discuss is kind of forecasting. Any other players who are going to make a mockery of their price tag at the start of the season? There is one who jumps out in the underlying data. He's currently...
But he always has.
He always has, yeah. He's 4th overall for non-pen XGI this year, and it's Darwin Nunez, 7.5. Can he cover Salah for the back end of the season, Sam? That's going to be the question on many people's lips. But I don't know. It's definitely definitely a sneaky one, and that could be a player who could make all the difference to loads of people,
Mhm.
especially thinking of, I don't know why, but I've literally just kind of thought of Callum Wilson last year.
Yeah.
No, one of those sorts of players who knows explosive. If they do have a decent double, or as I mentioned both earlier on, could he be a player who could muscle his way in and make a mockery of his price tag, Sam?
Oh, he absolutely could be. I think, is he still 7.5, 7.6? He's definitely under
7.5. We
7.5.
we sold him at the price that we bought him. Luckily,
Wow, yeah. I mean, the thing is with Nunez, he's actually had a really good season, and whether it's Premier League or outside of that, he has come up with really important goals. At the start of the year, he wasn't completely nailed, but he's found himself to become very important to the way Liverpool set up. His aggression, his chaotic nature as well, all feeds into it. He takes up two defenders at a time, so in seasons to come, even without Klopp in situ, you would imagine he's a very, very important player in the way Liverpool set up next year as well. But this year, you mentioned whether he could cover Salah. I'm not sure about cover because he's not great on bonus points. He does miss a lot of chances. We know how frustrating he is, but the thing I want to focus on is mainly the bonus point situation. For Darwin to really explode and therefore be able to cover someone like Salah, you need him to be getting most of those big chances on target and ideally in the back of the net as well. If he misses them, then the problem is he falls way off the bonus. Even with one goal, you'd expect Liverpool to get 2 or 3 in any given game. And it's the other goal scorers who maybe only get one shot on goal but score it that will end up in the bonus. So I don't think he covers Salah because Salah is that guy. He's the guy that only needs 2 shots. He'll score 2 goals and get maximum bonus. And obviously the extra points for being a midfielder. But complement, I think, absolutely. You can have both. And Darwin in his own right is a fantastic option at a great price point. But I don't think you can cover Salah at the moment. I think they're just two very different players in terms of the FPL experience you gain from them. In terms of the quality of player, Darwin is up there. He's incredible. As you know, I love him. But I think there's a reason he's not anywhere near the premium price point that Salah is.
Yeah, and he's not playing Saints every week, is he? So he's not going to be scoring double-digit hauls every week. That's kind of what the problem is really for him. Cool. Well, I hope that was an interesting sort of side path. Let's move into the week ahead preview, because there's always loads of stuff to talk about there, especially with this week coming. First part of that is always bold claims. Still 7-5 to me, but it feels like this week has been a bit of a bust for both of us, let's be fair.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't a million miles off with
No,
Lee.
you weren't.
It came close, and then luckily for us, because we were streaming straight after it, we were hoping for a winner one way or the other, so we had something to talk about on the pod. But sadly, it went Chelsea's way. So yeah, did not cause FPL shifts at all. But tonight's hasn't gone well. I messaged you, I think, after about 30 seconds of the game. Before it even got to 1-0, I was like, there's no way this is going to be a win by 1 goal. It's going to be a battering. Like Saka's, I think he hit the crossbar or the post after like a minute. It just never looked like going back.
No. I mean, yeah, it's one of those where I was kind of betting against my own team. You kind of felt like there could be that kind of impetus to make life difficult for ourselves, but yeah, I'll definitely take what we saw tonight. Really, yes, as I posted on X earlier on, it kind of felt a bit like when it's one of my favorite things to watch during FA Cup, I think kind of 3rd round, 4th round, when you got Premier League teams playing kind of League 2 National League opposition, thinking obviously Vinicius for Spurs versus Marine, when the admin of those accounts still has to act all excited, and you're kind of like, that's really embarrassing that you're really happy that your first team who you've played because your team is an absolute state is winning kind of 4-0 against the League 2 opposition, and you're kind of writing in sort of capital letters, acting like this is an amazing victory. It's such a mismatch, as you said earlier on. So I mean, it would have been one that kind of fell into the extra bold. I'd have been kind of demanding 2 points for that one. That's for sure. This week, though, I think we've been a bit more sort of normal, haven't we?
Yeah, normal I think is fine. We had to double check that they weren't like bold, but like they weren't they weren't like too likely, and they were indeed bold. I can confirm that mine is 11-5 on Bet365 at the moment, so it's definitely less likely than it is likely, although it doesn't seem that way. I'm going with 5 goals plus in Villa versus Spurs. Both teams with a lot of attacking upside at the moment, both a little bit leaky at the back. I can see this being a goal fest, and also just a cracking game regardless. So really looking forward to watching this one. Obviously, top 4 is on the line for both clubs. I think it's going to be a barnstormer. So I'm going with a highly entertaining 5-goal plus thriller.
Nice. I can definitely see that on the horizon. I've done it again. Betting on an individual to not go wild against Sheffield United. Maybe I need to reevaluate this a little bit. But Solanke to score less than 10 points. I think this is my bold claim for this week. Based on the fact that things never work out as you want them to. Solanke, he did look a little bit rusty against Burnley. Admittedly, should have probably scored. But yeah, what if he does become Olivier Giroud in the World Cup level against these two teams, creates all the space for other players to come in and do loads of points. Tavernier, my man, could be the one who walks away with loads. But yeah, Solanke score under 10 is my bold claim for this week.
Cool, fantastic. Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a lot of triple captains out there who hope you're wrong.
But, okay, I understand that.
But yeah, I can see it happening with the way our seasons have gone so far. Although looking at how Sheffield United have been performing recently, I would be surprised. So it is definitely a bold claim in both cases this week.
Cool. All right. So let's move to the week ahead then. And there's definitely quite a few things to speak about. So chip strategy, where have we landed? Or where are we with all of this? Are we still riding through the blank, which was my plan mostly, but Sam was not too sure. Best captain, definitely a short discussion. And then best transfers in for the week ahead. Lots to discuss there. So yeah, chip strategy, Sam. Now, do you want to take it away with your lovely graphic, which is on stream if you're watching YouTube? If not, Sam, talk you through anyway.
Yeah, so it's getting more and more simple by the week because there's less game weeks to contest with. But obviously, we're going straight into double game week 28 now. Bournemouth and Luton are doubling this week. Bournemouth have the better of the double. Obviously, Sheffield United and Luton both at home. Luton play Bournemouth and Crystal Palace both away. Now, game week 29 is obviously interesting because it's the big blank of the season. 8 teams play in that. Most interestingly of which is Luton playing. So not only do they double in game week 28, but they also play in 29. That will be important for strategy for anyone trying to look to avoid the free hit in game week 29. Outside of that, we've got Burnley versus Brentford. We've got West Ham versus Villa, Fulham versus Spurs, and of course the aforementioned Luton playing Nottingham Forest. So not the most exciting blank game week in terms of the fixtures left on the table. I think we'd all agree that most of them are going to be pretty competitive matches that are quite tough to predict the outcome of. Certainly tough to predict clean sheets in, as we're both finding out at the moment. But after that, game week 30, 31, all the way up to 34 will all be normal game weeks, although there is a bit of a fixture swing in there as well to contest with for some pretty major clubs. Followed by the double/potential but relatively unlikely blank at this point in game week 34. That will probably be a double featuring some of the lesser teams, the likes of Crystal Palace, Sheffield United, Everton, and again, Bournemouth potentially doubling in that week, although nothing confirmed as it stands right now. The two most interesting teams that could double in that game week could be Newcastle and Man United. Again, this is just based on predictions right now. Other teams could double depending on some very erratic FA Cup results in the quarterfinals. However, if things were to go the exact likely way, Newcastle and Man United would be quite likely to double that game week. That makes that game week quite appealing for something like a free hit or potentially dead ending out of that week if you pile into some of those lesser assets from the worst teams. Game week 37 is the final double of the season. That will probably be the big double and the one with more likely than not the better teams playing in it. So again, free hit or bench boost in that week will be probably quite popular as well. Although, as we've talked about earlier on this show throughout the season, that double could be problematic potentially if some of the clubs are hitting the beach early this season. Although, given the title race that we're currently experiencing, if we're looking at the start of double game week 37, that's 3 games to go for a lot of those big clubs. Is it likely that any of them will be more than 9 points adrift? I don't know. I'm thinking it's going to be tighter than that. So we'll see. At least 2 of them will still be in it, you would think. So that could mean there's still quite a lot on the line and a week worth attacking.
Yeah.
But that is the summary for now. We'll obviously get more information on 34 and 37 in game week 29 when we get the FA Cup results, which occur at the exact same time as all of the game week 29 fixtures go ahead of a 2-week international break, Tom.
Yeah, it's perfect. I mean, that probably when I'm wildcarding, I think at the moment, I'm still very, very likely to be not free hitting in 29. I'm kind of 70% there. It is not going to be the best week for me. I can guarantee that right now, just because if I'm going to do the move that I think I'm going to do this week, which we'll discuss in a little bit, that will leave me with 8 players and only 4 attackers, those being Bowen, Son, Tony, and Watkins, i.e. the core 4. But very little above that, and then kind of the rest will be kind of just detritus, Porro, Doughty, probably looking like it's going to be Reguilon, and then I've still got Leno. So I think that will probably be where it goes. But the idea, I suppose, is that I want to optimize 34 and 37, however they fall, and that was a really, really good summary of how they're going to fall, and see where I use the free hit, where I use the bench boost during that sort of period. I think that I want to wildcard, I guess, when I have maximum information on what's going on, and that will only be achievable after 29 or during 29, but you know what I mean, after deadline's passed. So for me, the wild card is off the table, although I can understand why people are doing it, especially if you think that your team's a little bit behind. You kind of feel like you can kind of seize an opportunity right now. For me, when I look at the team that you would build at the moment, and there are a few sort of good teams that I've seen which have been kind of floated around, they look great for now, is my only sort of observation on those teams. Not that they're not great, and not that they won't score loads of points, but I do think they are teams which are built for now to kind of navigate your way through 28, 29, and then beyond that, I think that you end up kind of being slightly outmoded. I suppose I think you end up kind of being a couple of weeks then again behind, because you're still kind of coming out of what everyone else is coming out of. If you haven't wildcarded or you haven't free hitted in 29, but you've built towards 29 as it is. That, I think, is why wildcard's off the table for what I'm going to do. That's why I'm not free hitting. I do think that 34 and 37, James on Planet FPL said that 37 is the best week for bench boost and the best week for free hit as well. What I do like the idea of is trying to hopefully get to 34 bench boostable if I possibly can, which may hopefully be informed well if I do wildcard in 30. I may not wildcard in 30. I may leave it a bit longer. I may even wildcard kind of after dead ending into 34. But I think I'm going to keep my kind of powder dry at the moment. I'm okay with 29 being a bit rubbish. I know that kind of analytics crew, for example, because FPL Review tells them to, no shade, that's just a statement of truth, are going to be there's going to be lots of kind of people free hitting around then. I know that there are kind of a few of the bigger voices in the community as well, like formerly of us Parish Harry, Andy as well, free hitting around then. But I think I'm going to try to run through, and I think that I've kind of, it's kind of instinctive, I suppose. It's not really. I've looked at it kind of quite a lot, and it's kind of, I don't know. I know it's kind of not going to be something which a lot of people, especially if you're analytically minded, would like. But I've said to you a few times, Sam, it's quite kind of vibes led for me. Like, I just don't like using the free hit then. I feel like there's going to be better utility later on, greater value to be kind of gleaned from using that free hit later on in the season, and using it aggressively versus defensively. And I feel fairly confident that if I do have the key men, as I discussed earlier, in place for 29, then I'll at least kind of scrape through with hopefully not a massive red, and then I'll kind of take it from there. That's kind of where I am with it all at the moment. You've had a little while since last Thursday. Where are you now? Still kind of in the in questions, or are you more set than you were then?
Yeah, I'm back and forth still. I'm afraid it's a decision I kicked one down the road from last week to this week. I can still get to 9 with a couple of hits in game week 29. That would include most of the important in quotes players for game week 29. All of the aforementioned players you mentioned already, plus potentially Morris as well. If I were to bring him in this week as well, could be interesting. I think the reason I'm 50-50 on it is because I've kind of found myself in that kind of sweet spot between I've definitely got enough players that I can get to for 29 to be really comfortable without taking too many hits, and the opposite where one injury could probably throw me down to 7, maybe 8, and Taylor is one of them, for example. Leno's another, Porro, who's still a fitness doubt. So there's still a lot of moving pieces that could force me into the free hit. And I think there's a cutoff point on where I would say it's value just to have one bad week, a few points behind the average in game week 29 to, okay, that is a significant amount of points I've left on the table there, because I'm missing 4 or 5 players. Again, it's completely dependent on the players in which I'm able to get to. And I'm pretty happy with the ones that I can transfer in now and up until getting week 29 and cover off most of the major bases. But even so, I think there's still going to be 2, maybe 3 that I'm definitely going to miss out on that I wish I had. So it's just, I think if I was to come to a decision right now, I would try to roll through it like you and wildcard straight out of it in game week 30. But 1, maybe 2 injuries to any of the key players or any of the players I've already got that I'm relying on that week could push me over the edge and throw me down the other strategy.
Yeah, I'm the same as you. And if there is an injury, a big injury, then I'd free hit without question. Like if Song got injured, for example, then I think that it leaves me with too much to do with 1 week to go. All right, let's move into the next bit, which is the best captain for the week ahead. I guess surely a very, very short discussion here. I'm going to just say my bit. Solanke, is he not the most open and shut case of all time?
Yeah, it probably is, to be honest. We probably don't need to talk about this for very long. Solanke is the best on the underlying data. He's on penalties too. And like, you couldn't ask for 2 better home fixtures as well. The only potential negatives are the fact that he's carrying a slight knock, but he did play 88 minutes, and he's got an extra week now to recover and hopefully be fit for those. And the fact that Bournemouth weren't in the best of form, but now they've beaten Burnley. They didn't look great, but they looked fine. And again, 2 home fixtures against some pretty awful, well, in at least Sheffield United's case, awful opposition. Luton have shown some promise, but definitely not defensively. They're still conceding goals. So yeah, Solanke for me is the favourite. The second favourite for me at the moment would be Morris, who has been very good recently. I think he's got 5 goals in his last 7 Premier League games and 2 assists in that time. So he's averaging a return a game over the last 7. He's on penalties. The data's 0.46 XGI per 90 across the season. Not too shabby at all. So he's a good backup option if Solanke, for whatever reason, isn't past fit for game week 28. But there's no need really discussing it any further than this at this point. It's open and shut. No, it's Solanke. It's got to be.
So, with that in mind, let's turn to the best transfer in this week, which is definitely one to discuss. So, Rob Jones in the chat said that he's going for free hit 29. Only have 4 players at the moment. Got two transfers, so we'll target 28, and that's certainly something which is going to be on the menu for those people for the week ahead, but for different reasons. So, some may be targeting this week. Some may be targeting this week in 29 as kind of a pair, and there may be some difficult decisions to be made. Let's start off in defence as we go through sort of the rest of everything. Defence this week does include goalkeepers, because I think that's important just to kind of roll into this one. But if you watch on YouTube, Alfie Doughty, who you wouldn't have been able to pick out of a lineup at the start of the year, is perhaps kind of more and more raising a profile, at least amongst FPL managers. I think if you go anywhere else, people are going to be like, who the hell is that guy? But yes, he is definitely one who is in mind. Did his thing despite kind of nominally playing as a centre back for a little bit last game, with the assist for the Luton second goal, and obviously pinging those crosses like a madman, with the double and also with 29 fixture. I think that he will be the must buy for most people this week. I'm fairly sure, Sam. I need to have a look, but I'm fairly sure he was in the top 5 for transfers in. Yeah, he is. He's in top 5 transfers in right now. Good little player on your shopping list, I'm assuming.
Oh yeah, very much so. I've almost made an early transfer, which I very rarely do, but I've just about held off for now on the off chance something very weird happens. But I will probably lock that one in quite early. It will be Ake out because Man City away at Liverpool, followed by a blank, followed by Arsenal, is probably not the best run of fixtures for clean sheets. And Doughty, a great attacking upside. He is constantly supplying crosses into the box. He's getting up that left wing. He's also on a number of set pieces, as we saw for the Morris assist. Great player. More than happy to bring him in at a pretty good price as well. So yeah, that's a pretty simple move, I think, for most people. If they don't have him already, he's the first defender I bring in, and I'd certainly bring him in ahead of Bournemouth defenders this week, despite the fact I would say they have better chances of clean sheets.
Cool. And speaking of the Bournemouth clean sheets, I'm really sorry. You tweeted way too early about Senesi. It was a definitely. I saw that. I was like, wow, that's too soon, Sam. Dear me. But yeah, off the menu now. I did see that he'd been called up to the Argentina squad as well. Poor guy. But he might be missing for a little bit. It's a hamstring thing. So surely one clean sheet against the upcoming opposition is going to be on the menu. You're looking at Sabani, Kirkes maybe if Lloyd Kelly's not around, or is it maybe just Neto, the man in goal, to go with? It does kind of feel like if you're looking at kind of defenders now, it's got to be one of those two teams. You're not going to be looking elsewhere. That's not even kind of discussing what game week is here in the defense at least. Any preference if you're going to go there at all?
Yeah, my preference would be Neto. The reason for that would be very much with the intention of having him on my bench in game week 29 rather than needing to rely on him. So he would be a second keeper that I can hide because I've already got Leno starting. And again, I just think he's a much better shout than Kaminsky is for clean sheets this week. With Zabani, I don't hate it, but unless you're free hitting in game week 29, I don't think you can go there now. I'd prefer to have Doughty over Zabani, no questions asked, based on the fact that you've got 29 as well. Zabani, you just know he's going to score a random goal this week based on everything everyone's saying this week, but he's got 0 goal threat. So you are very much just relying on clean sheets. And if you're taking a -4 for a defender, Zabani is a player you're almost certainly, based just on player quality and team quality in defense as well, you're probably going to want to get rid of pretty quickly after game week 29 is out of the way as well. So yeah, unfortunately, it's probably a -4 to bring him in, probably a -4 to get rid of him at some point as well. So you're really needing a clean sheet, possibly 2, to make that even make sense. Kirkes, as someone mentioned in the chat as well, Sponge mentioned, in fact, in the chat, Kirkes, I don't mind it. He's got better attacking upside than Zabani, but equally, I think it's a very short-term answer. And if you're buying a Bournemouth defender, I'm presuming you're free hitting in 29, which means you're probably leaving the wild card for a bit later than game week 30, 31, by which point Kirkes could have lost his place. And you're not really making the most of the fact that Bournemouth still have a decent run of fixtures all the way up to 34, where they could double. So I think Kirkes, whilst in the immediate term for this double game week looks quite good, you're probably going to want that Bournemouth player for a few weeks if you're following the strategy to free hit 29 and then move on to 34 with transfers. Therefore, I think Neto just makes the most sense because you can hide him on your bench quite a lot. And with those fixtures, you can actually upgrade him to your first keeper for game week 30 and 31, for example. So yeah, that's probably the way I would go personally at the moment.
Cool. Yep, certainly makes a lot of sense. Let's move on to midfielders. Richarlison being sold, and I guess the one kind of quirk about Bournemouth and Luton is a chronic lack of midfield options, really. I mean, I've got a soft spot for Tavernier. I do think he'll do well. But, I mean,
don't.
Yeah, this year it's not going to really be the way we go, is it? Really? I think Son and Bowen are the obvious sort of key beneficiaries here. So Talisman with 29 fixtures, so surely pretty obvious. I have seen there's obviously a few Foden buyers out there. He's in the top. He was in the top 5 this morning. He's not anymore. Surely a case of boat missed, and I guess a really sort of interesting place to be in here, because for us, Sam, as well, for me certainly as a mostly likely non-29 free hitter, I've got to be looking at getting rid of a player who doesn't have a game in 29, right? I've got to be looking at a player who's got a good game this week, and a game in 29 is a talisman. Okay, that's probably Bowen because I've already owned Son. And the only people I can sell to get Bowen are Saka or Foden. And Saka's got Brentford at home and has Man City in 30, so it could be on the table to sell. But I've got a little bit of money in him. Whereas Foden's got Liverpool away and then a blank and then Arsenal at home. It's a really difficult scenario, and I'm very much looking potentially at selling Foden. It's a little bit of a football brain versus FPL brain thing going on. Like initially, I was thinking, you know what, there's no way I can sell Foden after all of this. But if you look at it over the course of the next couple of games, you've got Foden with a blank versus Liverpool, with a game versus Liverpool and then a blank, versus Bowen, who's got Burnley at home, and then Aston Villa in a game that Foden doesn't play in. So you'd be thinking that that pays for itself, especially if I'm not spending nothing on the transfer. Add to the fact that I'm likely wildcard in game week 30, so that means that I can bring him back if I need to. Even though it does look like one that your football brain may be thinking that's a terrible decision. In terms of FPL, in terms of the schedule, it probably makes a lot of sense to bring Bowen in this week and make sure I've got an extra player in situ for game week 29, as well as having a decent fixture for the week on paper, because you can, on a 1 week basis, over the course of the next few weeks, if I wanted to kind of lay it out that way, Foden obviously beats Bowen, I'd imagine, because he's just a better player and playing for a better team. But if Foden versus Liverpool versus Bowen versus Burnley, on paper, you'd imagine Bowen outscores him, right? And of course, Bowen outscores him when Foden doesn't have a game. I say that, and Bowen gets sent off from his penalty. But I kind of feel like awkwardly that's going to probably be the transfer that I make this week. And I do think that kind of keys into a lot of what we're going to be seeing, and kind of the theme of this pod a little bit, according to how you've titled it, because it is going to be kind of silly season, and not silly season in a pejorative way, but making on paper fairly awkward transfers that you wouldn't make in a normal sort of course of the season's sort of progression, outside of kind of this particular weird sort of little microcosm of the season where you're planning for a particular event which only impacts FPL managers. Like if you go out and speak to anybody who's not really an FPL person and say, yeah, you know what, I'm selling Foden this week in my fantasy football team, like, what the are you doing? Like, the man's absolutely on fire. But right now it makes a lot of sense. Am I just, am I right for thinking that the FPL brain should win out?
I think so. I'm very similar to you at the moment, that it feels wrong to be getting rid of a player on this good a run of form. But yeah, I mean, the fixtures do dictate points to an extent. They're not the be all and end all form, and just player ability comes into it. But it's not like Bowen's data is that inferior to Foden's in the first place anyway. So I think it makes sense to play the fact that he's got 2 fixtures instead of 1, and one of which is including that Burnley game when Foden obviously plays Liverpool. So look, I mean, obviously Foden can haul in any game, but it is statistically less likely that he hauls against the better teams, whereas it's statistically more likely that Bowen would haul against the worst teams. So I think it does make sense to do it. There are a few comments in the chat about other options as well. So Maddison's been mentioned, Kudus as well. Yeah, both decent options. I think if you've already got Son, then Maddison makes sense as that second Spurs midfielder. And he's probably a player that I wouldn't be targeting necessarily this week, but ahead of game week 29, he'd be high on my radar. I'd probably put Bowen ahead of Maddison this week because of the fixture, because it's Burnley, whereas obviously I'm predicting loads of goals in the Villa Spurs game, but Maddison's not really necessarily the goal threat. He's more of the creative force. So I can probably wait a week on Maddison and hope that Bowen pops up with a couple of goals against Burnley. I'd probably prioritize it that way. Kudus as well. I don't mind it, but the underlying data isn't screaming to me that he needs to be selected ahead of Bowen at the moment, but he is explosive. He's a great player, very talented. And if you want to go differential, then absolutely fine. He's more, in my view, more of a player that I'd be tempted to get on the free hit, where I only need to hope for a one-off explosion rather than consistent returns across 2 weeks, for example. Like, I feel like it's a Halley's Comet kind of event with Kudus, where it all happens at once. Rather than with Bowen, we can consistently rely on him to do something, even if it's not as explosive, usually, obviously barring the hat-trick recently. So that's probably the way I'd play it personally. And I think Bowen just makes a lot of sense this week. The question is, in my team, is he worth a hit for Foden? So that's, well, I wouldn't necessarily even need to sell Foden. I could sell Garnacho, but I'd be benching Foden. So is it worth the hit?
Oh, benching Foden, Sam. Yeah.
Well, you're selling him.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I think if your position is better because you can at least hold Foden. I don't know. Would you sell him again? Would you sell him in 29 to beef up your team if you want?
Possibly, yeah. Possibly.
Yeah. Okay. That definitely kind of makes it. I don't know. Maybe I'd be tempted to be a bit of a wuss about it and so just bench him and then kind of come back to it in 29 and think, do I want to really sell this guy? or does he kind of form part, especially if you're wildcarding in 30 of the team that you want? Next kind of 3 fixtures. Yeah, I mean, they are the toughest on the roster, really, for Man City. But it is Man City and they are the tough fixture. And the form he's in at the moment, it is a difficult kind of situation to be in, really, to be looking at selling the guy. It just kind of, I guess, makes sense on paper. That's kind of the only way that I'm looking at it right now. But yeah, I think my Alan, a friend of mine, said to me the other day that if someone did write into the pod and said, I was looking at buying 1 or 2 players, Foden, who's playing Liverpool away, or Bowen, who's playing Burnley at home, we'd both be kind of saying, just buy Bowen. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
I know obviously I do own Foden at the moment, so I'm incurring a transfer to do it. But it does kind of feel like, if I'm only kind of incurring one transfer, I'm not taking the hit. And it is within this sort of kind of isolated period. And I do have a strategy to potentially bring him back in a couple of weeks' time when the fixtures kind of slightly ameliorate, or at least, or maybe I'll be bringing him in 30. I do have that sort of structure in place to be able to bring him back. So it is horrible, awkward, but I think that it may be one that some FPL managers are faced with thinking about, especially if you're not free hitting in 29. Sometimes you do have to make gnarly transfers, I guess, in fantasy football, and that's the beginning and the end of it.
You think that's a horrible transfer to make? You wait for the forward section of this.
Well, let's go there. So.
So yeah, obviously Solanke's going to be top, right, by a mile. And we don't really need to discuss him, I don't think, any more than we already have. We've already mentioned how good of a captaincy option he is. I think the big question everyone's going to be asking, if they've already got Solanke in situ, is, do we bring in Carlton Morris?
Depends who for. That's the
$1 million question, isn't it, Tom?
Yeah, so you wouldn't be selling Watkins, would you?
Wouldn't be selling Watkins. especially with a game in 29.
Oh, yeah.
There is
You've only
one
got
other
three.
player
You've
that
only
could
got,
be
you only got
sold.
3 forward slots, haven't you? So,
Yeah,
is there any EV in selling the robot?
yeah,
And it's definitely something which I think is going to be something that we discuss maybe a bit more next week as well. In terms of selling Haaland, but I suspect most people are going to be free hitting, so maybe now is the time. I mean, the man is, as some podcast somewhere predicted. I can't remember who they were, Sam. Someone predicted at least that his price was going to skyrocket. Up 0.6, I think it is, since he came back from injury.
yeah.
Um,
We're all millionaires.
it's definitely, yeah, it's one that's going to be thought about an awful lot. I don't know, people are thinking at selling selling, Haaland and Foden for Morris and Barkley, for example, this week. I've seen
Yeah.
tweeted, which is a preposterous on paper, as preposterous as just selling Foden for a West Ham attacker or something like that. But it's all on the sort of on the ledger to be done potentially. What are your thoughts on this?
I'm really tempted. I'm not gonna lie. It's if I follow the strategy of wildcarding in game week 30, then it does make a lot of sense to go for Morris with 3 games to Haaland with 1 against Liverpool away from home. The issue is it would be for a -4, so it's not just a straight 3 games versus 1. It is more complicated than that. But one way or another, I need to sell Solanke next week to get to Tony anyway. And then this -4 would be giving me an extra player this week and an extra player next week. So I think on paper, it does actually make a lot of sense. Obviously, there's value tied up in Haaland, so that would be annoying to get rid of, although it's only 0.3 million. And I know we go back and forth about it quite a lot, but I think at this point in the season, I'd take the points over the 0.3 personally. But we know how good Haaland is. We know that he can cash his XG in any given week. It's a bit frustrating he did that in the cup rather than in the league this week. But we know that he is capable of that in any one game. And if he were to all of a sudden explode in one game against Liverpool, for example, it's less likely than an average game because it's Liverpool. They've got a decent defense, but it's still very possible. And that could just completely nullify any upside that Morris could have on your team. That being said, though, it's on paper, it's 3 fixtures versus 1, Tom, and I am pretty tempted to do it.
Fair. I mean, I'm just looking to hold for 29. I am sort of with you on it, but equally I'm sort of not. Like just thinking that the floor for Haaland, okay, yeah, he's got clown feet, hasn't got his finishing boots, etc., etc.
He did just score 5, so it's not that bad.
Like, I'm just parroting some things that I've seen. Would you be surprised if he outscored Morris next week?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, I would be surprised. I think it's more likely than not Morris outscores Haaland.
Okay.
He's got a double. He's got a double.
Yeah.
I think he's on penalties as well.
Yeah, but I don't know. It's one of those, isn't it, where I can see both sides of it. I just don't know. I don't know whether I can bring myself to do it. There is the option is there. The option is there for me, especially because I'm looking to wildcard pretty much straight away in 30. Although I might leave it for a week. You never know. It could be kind of facility.
Yeah.
I think who have they got in 30? Spurs away.
Luton is that?
Yeah.
They've got Spurs that week. Yeah,
it's definitely one that I need to think about. I don't know whether I'd do it this week, but you're right. There are definitely points on offer, like points on the table, aren't there?
But admittedly, like saying all of that, I'm not locked in on that at all. Like there are multiple universes where Haaland outscores Morris even with 1 game to 3. So it's not a simple move, but on paper, the wise play is to do it. I think even for the -4, it's just the fear I've got of Erling Haaland doing something against Liverpool is so great at this point that I think maybe I'm just going to end up rocking myself to sleep and not making the transfer and just hoping it doesn't hurt me too much.
I'm throwing my pathological fear of not being able to afford the wild card that I want. having to find 0.3 more. I'm already kind of looking to, especially if Foden's part of it, I need to find another 0.3 on him. So that's 0.6 more I'd need to find, assuming I want to buy Haaland back, and I probably want to buy Foden back as well. Oh boy, I'm not sure I'd do it, put it that way. But maybe I need to look away from my own subjective thoughts, and maybe I do need to think about it more clinically, which I'll try to do this week. But yeah, it's definitely a tantalizer, that's for sure. For Carlton Morris, like, imagine. It's one of those things that you
7
think
returns
about
in his last 7. He's not bad. He's got
no,
14
no, I'm not.
returns this
I'm not.
season.
I'm not denigrating him. I'm just saying
Oh,
on
right.
paper, like, imagine, like, you know, when you, at the end of the season, when we're kind of thinking, what was the one thing that I did that I didn't think I'd be doing this year?
Yeah.
I sold Erling Haaland for Carlton Morris.
Yeah.
That's what I did.
You could do the baller move and do triple City to triple Luton this week.
Yeah,
and that would be for the record books.
Different pay for a lot of people. All right, so our teams to end then. Where are we at the moment?
You're first up, mate.
I am first. So Foden to Bowen, I think I will be doing. And then I need to figure out whether I go for Haaland to Morris. By the sounds of it, it's definitely something that I've not really thought about, but you have made a good case for it. Double Arsenal defense again for me. Obviously Doughty in play, Leno, and then I'm going to play Palmer over Gordon again. Hopefully third time lucky in terms of that. And the rest of the team sort of picks itself, and Solanke captain. It's just a case whether I bomb out both my City attacking options, because Haaland will give me yet another player in 29 as well to contend with. So there's definitely quite a fair bit to think about for me. Short and sweet. What about you?
Yeah, so mine's a little bit more complicated because there's a number of routes I could take. So the first and most simple move is Doughty in for Ake. I think that happens in almost all scenarios at this point. And then the second bits will depend very heavily on whether I choose to free hit in game week 29 or run through and wildcard out in game week 30, much like what you're suggesting to do at the moment. So yeah, Ake to Doughty, pretty simple. That's the free transfer. Then it's looking likely that the two other players on the chopping block would be Foden and Haaland. Although, as explained, it wouldn't necessarily mean selling Foden this week. I could actually sell Garnacho because I've got the funds in the bank. So I could sell Garnacho and just put Foden on my bench, which again really makes no difference which way I do it, unless I'm hoping Foden comes off the bench this week, because either way, both of them don't play next week. And either way, it would be a transfer that I'd probably make on the other midfielder ahead of game week 29, because there are other moves, other midfielders I want to target that week if I was avoiding the free hit. If I wasn't avoiding the free hit and I was going to use the free hit next week instead, then obviously the situation changes a little bit. I probably still go for Doughty, but then I also maybe look at bringing in Neto, for example, in goal for Turner and starting him instead. And then I've got a second keeper to run through afterwards in game week 30 and beyond, and potentially a double game week keeper in situ for 34 as well. Okay. So those are the routes I'd take. I could go as far as a -8 this week and get rid of Ake, Haaland and Garnacho to bring in Doughty, Morris, and probably Bowen. I'm not convinced on Barkley, so I'm not going to go that far down. No, I don't think so. I would prefer Bowen. And that would be very much if I was lining up to not free hit in game week 29. I could actually then get to 10 with one hit in game week 29 as well. Or I could just go in with 9 without a hit, which I think is also probably okay. So yeah, it depends how aggressive I go this week with those transfers. But I feel like with the doubles on the table this week, if I'm going to take a hit, it's more likely to pay off if I do it now and get the benefit of the doubles. So I think that makes sense, but there's a lot more thinking for me to do before we hit the deadline. So I'm definitely not locked in yet.
Yeah, with your sorcery, I mean, if I remove Haaland, like, everything's possible. So I can do Gordon to Bowen, and then maybe Foden would be my saving for the next couple of weeks. There's a lot to think about this week. Yeah.
Yeah, it's real dividing like battle lines being drawn across the community this week. There's going to be two paths that people take. It's going to be really interesting to see which one pays off the most, I think.
Yeah, certainly. Cool. All right. I think that's everything for us this week, though.
I think it is. And we can confirm that Arsenal kept the clean sheet. So we both kept our double clean sheets. So we're both very happy come the end of this pod. In the meantime, though, you can find our end results, because I haven't checked my live rank. I presume it's a small green arrow, but I will put it on X later this evening. In the meantime, we have been Who Got the Assist. You can find us on X at WGTA_FPL, or myself at FPL Pricey, and on Instagram or Threads at WGTA.FPL. Again, I'm just FPL Pricey on there. If you did enjoy the pod, please do consider following us on those social channels, giving the pod a 5-star rating if you're listening on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, wherever. Or if you're watching along, especially if you're watching live, if you could leave a like or subscribe to the YouTube channel, that would be greatly appreciated as well.
Yeah, all those things help get the pod out there. Thanks, Sam. I hope you enjoyed the pod. I just want to mention the upcoming Bristol FPL meetup. Sadly, my grandmother died a couple of years ago, so I don't get down there as often as I used to. Won't be going on to this one. But if you're in the Southwest, definitely check it out. Uniquely, they're going to watch a live game, Yeovil versus Welling United, who are, funnily enough, my local non-league team. They're meeting at the Cooper's Mill pub in Yeovil to watch the early game too. Check out at FPL Face Off, all one word, on X. And I'll post it after the pod today if you want to get involved with that, if you're going down there. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed the pod. We hope it's just you think about pricing, and hopefully you'll value us higher after this. I'm sorry about that. I'm really sorry. We'll be back next Wednesday as Double Game Week reaches its climax. It's a bit of a stretch now without us. I'm sure that's probably a good thing for most people, barring any big shocks. Speak then. Have a good week.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?